99% of people think Wyoming is empty. And if you believe that too, you're missing why this landscape behaves unlike almost anywhere else in the United States. So before we visit the most remarkable places, we'll start with a few surprising facts that explain what Wyoming really is. Because once you understand them, everything you're about to see will make sense. Wyoming feels empty at first glance, but that emptiness is not a lack of life. It's the result of forces that have been shaping this land for tens of millions of years. This is one of the few places in North America where the Earth is still visibly unfinished. Beneath Wyoming lies one of the most geologically active regions on the continent. Heat rises close to the surface here, warping ground, water, and time itself. In some areas, the crust is only a few kilometers thick, roughly 3 to 6 miles, far thinner than the continental average. That heat doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it moves slowly, silently, changing landscapes not over days, but over centuries. And that's the first thing most people miss. Wyoming isn't dramatic because it's chaotic. It's dramatic because it's patient. The state covers nearly 253,000 square kilometers, about 97,800 square miles. That's larger than the United Kingdom. Yet fewer than 600,000 people live here. That works out to roughly 2 people per square kilometer, about 5 per square mile, making it the least densely populated state in the US. But here's where it gets interesting. Wyoming wasn't always this empty. Long before modern borders existed, this land supported vast migrations of animals and complex human cultures. Indigenous peoples moved across it seasonally, following herds, weather patterns, and water. Their understanding of the land wasn't based on ownership, but timing. Knowing when a valley would flood, when grass would return, when winter winds would become dangerous, and those winds still matter. Wyoming is one of the windiest regions in North America. In many areas, average wind speeds exceed 20 kilometers per hour, around 12 miles per hour year-round. Gusts regularly climb far higher. This constant movement of air shapes everything. Vegetation grows lower, snowdrifts form unpredictably, and even modern infrastructure has to adapt. It's one reason wind energy thrives here. The land never truly rests. But wind is only part of the equation. Wyoming sits at the intersection of several major ecological zones. Plains rise into basins, basins lift into mountains, and those mountains feed water into systems that stretch far beyond the state itself. Rivers born here eventually travel thousands of kilometers, over 1,200 miles in some cases, before reaching distant oceans. Yet despite all that water movement, much of Wyoming is technically semi-arid. Rainfall varies wildly. Some regions receive less than 250 millimeters, under 10 inches per year. While higher elevations can receive several times that amount as snow. This imbalance creates sharp contrasts. One valley may be lush for a few weeks, while another just beyond it remains dry and exposed. This unpredictability is why survival here has always required adaptation. Early settlers quickly learned that Wyoming did not forgive assumptions. Railroads brought people in, but nature decided who stayed. Winters could arrive suddenly, dropping temperatures by 30 degrees Celsius, over 50 degrees Fahrenheit, in a matter of hours. Snowstorms buried livestock. Droughts erased entire seasons of work. And yet, people remained. Wyoming's identity became tied not to comfort, but resilience. That mindset still shapes life here today. Communities are small, distances are vast, and self-reliance is not a lifestyle choice, it's a necessity. In some parts of the state, the nearest town may be 80 kilometers, about 50 miles away, with no services in between. Cell coverage fades, roads disappear into open land, and that isolation has consequences. Wildlife thrives in ways that are increasingly rare elsewhere. Large mammals still move across open territory without fences breaking their routes. Seasonal migrations stretch hundreds of kilometers, well over 200 miles, guided by instinct older than human memory. But here's the part that surprises most people. Despite its reputation for emptiness, Wyoming is one of the most biologically intact regions in the continental United States. Not because it was carefully preserved, but because it was difficult to control. Farming, mining, and development all arrived, but none ever fully dominated the land. Even today, much of Wyoming remains publicly owned. Vast areas are managed collectively rather than privately, allowing ecosystems to function on a scale that has disappeared elsewhere. It's one of the reasons the land still feels honest, unchanged, not by intention, but by resistance. And that resistance extends underground. Wyoming is rich in natural resources: coal, oil, gas, and minerals. Yet extracting them has always been a negotiation with the land itself. Boomtowns appeared and vanished. Entire communities rose quickly, then faded when conditions shifted. Some places were never meant to last, and Wyoming makes that very clear. This cycle of rise and retreat shaped the culture. People here value space, silence, distance, not as luxuries, but as protections. There's a reason conversations tend to be brief, and promises are taken seriously. In a place where help might be hours away, reliability matters more than reputation. And that brings us back to the idea of emptiness. Wyoming isn't empty because nothing happens here. It's empty because what happens here happens slowly. Landforms change over thousands of years. Weather rewrites the rules every season. Life adapts, retreats, and returns. Nothing is rushed. Nothing is wasted. Which is why the places we're about to explore matter so much. They are not random highlights on a map. They are visible expressions of everything you've just learned. Geology, climate, isolation, resilience, all converging in specific locations where the land speaks a little louder. And once you've seen those places through this lens, you'll realize Wyoming was never empty at all. It was simply waiting to be understood. Yellowstone is one of the few places on Earth where the land is still actively forming. This entire region sits above a massive volcanic system, and the heat from deep underground reaches unusually close to the surface. That heat controls almost everything here: how water moves, where animals travel, and even where humans are allowed to build. The park covers nearly 9,000 square kilometers, about 3,500 square miles, yet large areas remain constantly monitored because conditions can change without warning. More than half of the world's geysers exist in this single area, but geysers are only part of the story. In some zones, soil temperatures shift within a few meters. Water can emerge close to boiling, then cool rapidly as it flows away. These extremes create a landscape that never fully settles. Wildlife has adapted to this instability. Seasonal movement patterns can span 70 to 100 kilometers, roughly 40 to 60 miles, as animals instinctively avoid areas where underground heat alters the surface. Even roads here are temporary solutions, designed to bend and retreat rather than resist. Yellowstone shows raw geological power in its most aggressive form, but that same heat doesn't always explode outward. Just beyond the most volatile zones, the energy slows. Water no longer erupts. Instead, it flows calmly across the ground, cooling as it spreads, leaving behind solid mineral layers that quietly grow upward, revealing a far more structured and unexpected side of the same forces. Here, heat stops exploding and starts building. Instead of pressure forcing water violently upward, mineral-rich water reaches the surface and flows slowly downhill. As it cools, it deposits calcium carbonate, creating solid terraces that grow, collapse, and rebuild themselves over time. Some formations expand by several centimeters per year, nearly an inch, making this one of the fastest changing landscapes in the park. What makes this place unusual is its structure. The terraces resemble staircases, frozen waterfalls, or artificial architecture, yet every edge and curve is shaped entirely by chemistry. The color variations come from heat-loving microorganisms that thrive at specific temperatures, turning the surface white, orange, brown, and sometimes even green. But even here, the calm doesn't last forever, because deeper within the same system, pressure builds again. And instead of constant flow, the land begins to release its energy in sudden, timed bursts that follow a rhythm no one fully controls. Old Faithful isn't famous because it's the largest eruption in the park. It's famous because it's predictable. While most geothermal features erupt randomly, this one follows a cycle driven by pressure, temperature, and a complex underground plumbing system. Water seeps deep into the ground, heats beyond boiling, and becomes trapped until pressure forces it upward. When it finally releases, the eruption can send water over 30 meters, nearly 100 feet, into the air. The timing varies, but the mechanism stays consistent. After each eruption, the system resets, refilling slowly until the next release. This reliability allowed scientists to study geothermal behavior in real time, using this site as a natural laboratory to understand how heat and water interact underground. And when that pressurized water finally finds a different path, the energy doesn't disappear. Instead of rising upward, it begins to cut downward, using gravity rather than pressure to reshape the land on a much larger scale. This landscape wasn't created by explosions. It was carved by persistence. Over thousands of years, a powerful river cut through layers of volcanic rock, ash, and hardened lava. The result is a canyon stretching roughly 39 kilometers, about 24 miles, with walls dropping more than 300 meters, nearly 1,000 feet in places. Unlike typical canyons formed in sedimentary rock, these walls are unstable, constantly eroding and collapsing. The colors are not decorative, they're chemical. Iron compounds oxidize as hot water, and steam rise through the rock, staining the canyon in shades of yellow, red, and white. Every rainfall and seasonal melt continues the process, carrying material downstream and widening the gap year by year. What makes this canyon unique is its speed. Compared to geological standards, it formed rapidly. The land here doesn't wait millions of years to change. It responds immediately to water, heat, and gravity. This is geothermal energy expressed at scale. And as the river continues beyond these walls, it leaves the geothermal core behind. Ahead lies a different kind of landscape, one shaped less by heat and erosion and more by elevation, ice, and sharp vertical relief rising suddenly from open land. This landscape feels abrupt, and that's because it is. Here, mountains rise almost straight from the valley floor with little warning. There are no long foothills, no gradual buildup. In places, the vertical difference between valley and summit reaches nearly 2,100 meters, about 7,000 feet, within a short horizontal distance. That sharp rise is the result of active faulting, not erosion. The land didn't slowly wear down, it broke. These mountains are also relatively young in geological terms. Their jagged peaks haven't been softened by time, ice, or weather to the extent seen elsewhere. What you see is raw structure, exposed rock, sharp ridgelines, and steep faces shaped by gravity more than age. Glaciers once carved through this range, leaving behind U-shaped valleys and basins that still influence water flow today. Snowmelt feeds streams that move quickly, reacting to seasonal changes rather than settling into predictable patterns. What makes this place so striking isn't just height, it's proximity. The mountains feel close because they are close. There's very little separating wild vertical terrain from flat, open ground. And at the base of these peaks, that contrast becomes even clearer. Because tucked directly beneath this sudden rise is a body of water formed by ice, silence, and collapse, a place where scale becomes intimate and movement slows dramatically. Jenny Lake exists because ice once blocked the land's escape. As glaciers retreated, massive blocks of ice melted in place, leaving behind a deep, cold basin pressed directly against steep rock walls. The result is a lake that feels far deeper than it looks. In some places, the water reaches over 75 meters, nearly 250 feet deep, staying cold year-round and remarkably clear. What makes Jenny Lake powerful is proximity. The mountains don't sit behind it, they rise immediately above it. Sound carries differently here. Wind accelerates without warning. Light shifts quickly as shadows slide down sheer rock faces. Everything feels compressed, focused, and intense. This is glacial scale concentrated into a narrow space, but that concentration doesn't last. Just beyond this basin, the landscape opens, and the same water spreads outward into Jackson Lake. The rock walls pull back, the horizon widens. Wind becomes constant, pushing waves across a surface that stretches for kilometers, over 20 kilometers, nearly 13 miles, from end to end. Here, the lake isn't about depth anymore, it's about scale. And once the land opens this wide, the journey naturally continues outward, away from ice and water, toward a landscape defined not by enclosure, but by isolation. This valley is not defined by what rises above it, but by what moves through it. Jackson Hole stretches roughly 90 kilometers, about 55 miles from north to south, forming a broad corridor between mountain ranges. Unlike enclosed basins, this valley remains open, allowing animals, weather systems, and people to pass through rather than settle permanently. Historically, That openness made long-term survival difficult. Winters were harsh, resources seasonal, and isolation unavoidable. Early communities formed slowly, shaped by necessity rather than expansion. Even today, the valley maintains a rhythm dictated more by nature than infrastructure. Wildlife uses this corridor extensively. Seasonal migrations funnel through the valley, following routes established long before modern boundaries. Open land allows visibility, but also vulnerability. Predators, weather, and scarcity all play a role in shaping movement. What makes Jackson Hole unique is balance. Development exists, but it doesn't dominate. Space remains intentional. The valley functions as a transition zone, not just geographically, but ecologically. And as the land begins to narrow again beyond this open passage, the story shifts. Ahead lies a structure that rises alone from the plains, not part of a range, not connected to a system, but standing by itself, shaped by forces that followed a very different set of rules. This formation doesn't belong here, and that's exactly why it stands out. Rising abruptly from otherwise rolling terrain, this rock column reaches about 386 meters, roughly 1,267 feet above the surrounding land, with sheer, vertical sides that make it look almost artificial. Unlike mountain ranges formed by compression or uplift, this structure began as molten rock that hardened underground. Over time, the softer surrounding layers eroded away, leaving the solid core exposed. The most striking feature is its geometry. As the rock cooled, it fractured into long, vertical columns, a rare pattern caused by uniform contraction. These columns aren't carved. They're the result of physics, frozen in place. For indigenous cultures, this site has long held spiritual meaning, tied to stories that explain its form through memory rather than measurement. For scientists, it became a case study in erosion and volcanic intrusion. Two explanations, same conclusion. This place demands attention. And once you leave this solitary landmark behind, the story shifts again. From geological mystery to human intention, to a place where history wasn't shaped by stone and pressure, but by people trying to survive, settle, and define the edge of the American frontier. Cody exists because the frontier needed a foothold. This town didn't grow by accident. It formed at a strategic point where travel, supply, and survival intersected. Named after a larger-than-life figure of the American West, Cody became a gateway, not just to surrounding wilderness, but to an idea of expansion driven by confidence and spectacle. What makes Cody interesting isn't size or population, it's purpose. This was a place built to support movement. People heading west, goods passing through, and stories being shaped for an audience far beyond the plains. Railroads, roads, and trade routes turned it into a logistical hub, while its cultural identity leaned heavily into the mythology of the West. As routes extend outward from here, development thins. The land opens again, water becomes scarce, color shifts, and the terrain begins to tell a story shaped less by settlement and more by exposure, erosion, and sheer scale. Flaming Gorge looks almost unreal. And that's because color does most of the work here. Steep canyon walls glow in shades of red and orange, formed from layers of sediment laid down hundreds of millions of years ago. These layers were slowly lifted, tilted, and then carved by a powerful river that followed weakness in the rock rather than resistance. The result is a deep corridor stretching for dozens of kilometers, with cliffs rising over 300 meters, nearly 1,000 feet in some places. Water defines this landscape, but not gently. Seasonal changes can dramatically alter flow and appearance. Light transforms the rock throughout the day, making the canyon feel different hour by hour. What sets Flaming Gorge apart is contrast. Harsh desert terrain meets vivid water. Heat meets depth. Stillness meets movement. It's a reminder that erosion doesn't need chaos, only time and consistency. And as the canyon widens and the land begins to flatten again, the journey shifts towards something quieter. Cheyenne wasn't shaped by mountains or heat. It was shaped by movement. This city emerged where rail lines met open plains, becoming a critical junction for transport, trade, and communication across the American interior. Unlike earlier settlements built around resources or geography, Cheyenne existed because speed mattered. Trains could cross hundreds of kilometers, over 300 miles, in days instead of weeks, and this location made that possible. Wind defines life here. Open terrain offers little resistance, allowing weather systems to move freely across the plains. Gusts regularly sweep through the city, reinforcing a sense of exposure that never fully disappears. Unlike sheltered valleys or mountain basins, Cheyenne sits in the open, visible, connected, and constantly in motion. Historically, this made it resilient. Supplies arrived faster. Information traveled quicker. The city became a gateway rather than a destination, supporting growth without relying on isolation. What makes Cheyenne unique is contrast. After days of silence, distance, and raw landscape, this is where Wyoming connects outward. The land doesn't dominate here, it cooperates. And that cooperation tells an important story. Because Wyoming isn't defined by one force alone. It's defined by how extremes coexist. Wyoming isn't empty. It's selective. Heat, ice, wind, distance, and time all play a role in deciding what remains visible and what disappears. The places we explored aren't isolated wonders. They're expressions of the same forces, revealed in different forms. And once you understand that, Wyoming stops feeling quiet. It starts feeling intentional. Thank you for watching. And wherever your next journey leads, may it slow you down enough to truly see the land beneath your feet.